Getting started with Chain of Command, historical, World War II, an amazing rule set. That's what we're going to explore in this podcast and this vlog. So you've obtained the rules. You're checking out the army lists. We're now going to move to that physical aspect. We're going to start building our armies. We're going to start looking at terrain, and we're going to assemble a hobby checklist here to get you in the game and give you a couple of considerations. Now, the interesting thing about Chain of Command, as with all, or I should say most historical war games, it's miniature independent. This means you can go to a variety of sources, a lot of decisions, and based on your budget, really look at expensive models or more budget-friendly economic models. Right now, my Chain of Command army, plastic, they're all plastic soldier company. My Germans, my Americans, about $60 or $70 USD per army. And that's including all of the options. I've got some Panzer IIs, some Panzer IIIs. I've got some Tiger tanks. I've got machine gun teams, mortar teams, all the support choices on there. Likewise with the Americans. So essentially, I kind of have everything that I need for the game. Looking at miniatures, and it's my intention to move to metals at some point, the big thing with historicals is that you can look and go into metal sculpts and metal models. The detail is better based on the scale. There's more variety in the miniatures, more poses, and in my opinion, it looks a little bit crisper, and especially in the smaller scale, there's a little bit of biofeedback when you pick the models up and move them around. I think it makes it a little more pleasant to play with and to push around on there to get that feedback. You can go into metals. You can go into plastics on there. Plastics, of course, being the cheaper of the options. The big challenge, though, with historicals is not so much the army, because you're kind of locked in. And based on the tech period of the time, if we're looking at World War II, it's a closed box. It's not like other wargaming systems, say like Warhammer 40,000, where new units are being introduced all the time. So once your army is set, you're kind of set for life. But where that balances out and considerations is terrain. You are going to need a lot of terrain to historically recreate some of these battlefields. And the fun thing about historicals is looking at actual pictures from the time period, or if we're going back to other things like DBA, DBN, Roman times, Napoleonics, looking at the battlefield and actually physically recreating that literal battlefield. Google map it, recreate that battlefield on the tabletop. You're going to need lots of trees, lots of hedgerows, roads, buildings. I would say historically, Chain of Command wants to use more terrain than you think. That's not to say you can't play a game with less terrain on there, a couple of hills and a building. Absolutely. But tactically, for it to recreate that time period, you need to create those sections of the battlefield on there. It's going to take more time and more investment on the terrain side versus the miniature side. But in terms of acquisition of miniatures and in terms of figuring out what directions you want to go, Chain of Command World War II and historicals in general has the smallest amount of buy-in for your armies.